There's a scene near the very beginning of Star Wars, the first film, 1977, that I've thought about probably more than any other scene in cinema. A corridor of white smoke, rebel soldiers in orange, pressed against the walls, rifles up, and then a door bursts open and something walks through it. A 7-foot figure in black armor, moving through the chaos the way a tide moves over sand, absolutely unhurried, as if the people in his way don't quite register as an obstacle. The breathing starts, that low mechanical exhale that is probably the most recognizable sound in the history of science fiction. And within about 4 seconds, before he said a single word, you know everything you need to know about Darth Vader. You know he believes he's won before it begins. You know he's not afraid. And you know that his relationship to power is not quite human. That's a lot of information to communicate through posture alone, honestly. I've been thinking about Vader lately, or more specifically, thinking about what he actually represents philosophically, not just as a villain, not just as a symbol of intimidation, but as a kind of living argument for a particular way of seeing the world. Because underneath the armor, underneath the mythology, that's what he is. He's not just a character, he's a worldview. And it's a genuinely interesting one, which is, I think, why he's endured the way he has. Nearly 50 years since that first film, and the image of him walking through that smoke hasn't lost a single gram of its weight. He's not interesting because he's simply evil. He's interesting because the path he took to become what he became is one that any of us, in different circumstances, might recognize something of. The fear of losing someone, the rage that follows grief, the way institutions we trusted can quietly fail us while we're too busy believing in them to notice. These aren't alien experiences. They're deeply, uncomfortably familiar ones. So this is a long, unhurried wander through the philosophy of Darth Vader. We'll talk about the codes, both Sith and Jedi, and what they actually mean if you read them carefully. We'll spend time with Anakin Skywalker, who was a real person before he became a symbol, and the very specific mechanics by which fear and love and bad advice collapsed him. We'll look at the armor, the empire, the particular loneliness built into the life he chose. We'll bring in some real-world philosophy along the way. Nietzsche turns up, Plato turns up, the Stoics are surprisingly relevant, and eventually we'll follow the thread all the way through to that moment in Return of the Jedi where something shifts, where he picks up the Emperor and the story ends the way it was always trying to. If you're new here, welcome. This channel does long, slow, deep dives into fictional worlds, not as a way of avoiding thought, but as a way of doing it. Stories are one of the oldest tools human beings have had for working through questions that don't have clean answers. And Darth Vader, for all the merchandise and the lunchboxes and the theme park rides, is one of cinema's genuinely rich sources of those questions. Get comfortable. There's no rush at all. Before there was any armor, there was a boy in a desert. Tatooine, if you've never quite worked out the geography of the Star Wars galaxy, is a planet with essentially nothing going for it. 2 suns, almost no water, dangerous wildlife, and it sits far enough from the galactic center that it falls outside Republic jurisdiction, which is how it became and remained a place where slavery was legal, where human beings could be owned without the Senate caring particularly much about it. Anakin Skywalker was born into that system. He and his mother, Shmi, were slaves when we first meet them in The Phantom Menace, working for a Toydarian parts dealer called Watto, who had that very specific energy of small-time authority figures everywhere. Cheerful cruelty dressed up as pragmatism. Anakin was 9 years old. He built things obsessively. Pod racers, protocol droids from scrap parts, whatever he could get his hands on. And he was, as the Jedi would shortly discover, extraordinarily sensitive to the Force, more so than anyone on record, including Yoda. George Lucas, who thought about the mythology of Star Wars considerably more than he sometimes gets credit for, eventually settled on an explanation for this that is genuinely a bit wild. Shmi, when asked about Anakin's father, simply says there wasn't one. no father. He was, in Lucas's framing, conceived by the Force itself, which raises more questions than it answers, honestly. But let's set that aside. The point is, this particular boy was unusual in a way that exceeded what biology could account for. Here's what I find philosophically interesting about his childhood, though, and it works completely independently of the mythology. He grew up in conditions of near-total powerlessness. He was property, legally speaking. He had no say in where he went or what he did, no certainty about whether he or his mother were safe from one year to the next. And his response to that powerlessness was to build things, to manufacture control over small mechanical systems when control over his own life was unavailable. That's not a unique response to powerlessness. It's a very recognizable one. There's actually a thing in psychology sometimes called compensatory control, the idea that when people are deprived of agency over large things, they'll often seek to impose structure and order on small ones, cleaning obsessively during uncertain periods, organizing when things feel chaotic. For Anakin, it was machines. He could not free himself or his mother, but he could build a droid out of spare parts, and he could win a pod race, and he could make something work where before it hadn't. It's actually, in its way, quite touching, and it tells you something about what control would mean to him for the rest of his life. And then Qui-Gon Jinn arrives and disrupts everything, a Jedi Master calm and certain, who sees Anakin and immediately understands that he's looking at something extraordinary. Within about 2 days of knowing each other, Qui-Gon has decided that this boy is the chosen one, the prophesied figure who will bring balance to the Force, and has essentially staked his career on getting him trained. Anakin, to his credit, wins a pod race to secure his own freedom, because even at 9 he was apparently very capable of handling pressure. But Shmi stays behind, and that's the moment I keep returning to, not because it's dramatic necessarily, but because of what it reveals about the emotional logic Anakin is going to carry for the rest of his life. He leaves his mother behind, not entirely by choice, but he leaves because he's been told he has a destiny, and that destiny requires him to go, and he never quite recovers from the guilt and the grief of that. He can't. He was 9. The Jedi Council, when Qui-Gon brings him before them, initially refuses to train him at all. Yoda says plainly, "I sense much fear in you." And he's right, but their response to that fear is interesting. First they reject him, then they accept him, and then they never quite give him the emotional tools to work through what he's carrying. Nobody sits with Anakin Skywalker and says, "It is natural that you're afraid of losing people. Here is how to hold that fear without being held by it." Nobody does that. The training he receives is technical and spiritual, but not in the way he needed, deeply human. Obi-Wan Kenobi, who raises him, is a genuinely good man, and in many ways an excellent Jedi, but he is not the right mentor for this particular young man. He's principled and patient, and somewhat repressed about his own emotions, and he trains Anakin in his own image, which doesn't serve Anakin well. They love each other, genuinely, but love and the right kind of help are not always the same thing. Palpatine, meanwhile, takes a very different approach. He is warm and personal, and consistently tells Anakin that he's exceptional. The gap left by the Jedi's emotional limitations is filled methodically and patiently by someone who wants exactly what Anakin's gifts can give him. The tragedy of Darth Vader, I think, begins not on Mustafar, and not even in the Jedi Temple. It begins with a boy in a desert who loved his mother and was trained to believe that love itself was the problem. One more thing about that boy, actually, before we move on. It's easy to miss if you watch the prequels quickly, that he was a remarkably kind child. He helps Padme and the Jedi strangers he's just met without being asked to, risks his own life in a pod race to win them passage off planet, and offers shelter to people he's only just encountered. He's 9 and enslaved, and he's still oriented outward, toward other people, toward what can be done for them. The Jedi Code talks a great deal about compassion in the abstract, The boy Anakin Skywalker simply has it without having been trained to. This matters because it complicates the later reading of him as someone who goes bad primarily through selfishness. His fall, when it comes, is driven by love and fear, and love, whatever else it does, is not inherently selfish. The desire to protect the people you care about, taken to a catastrophic extreme, is not the same thing as simply wanting power for yourself. Palpatine would have had a much harder time with someone who was genuinely self-interested from the beginning. He works with what Anakin has, which is enormous capacity for attachment, and turns it. George Lucas, speaking about the saga, described the whole architecture of it as being about how a good person goes wrong. Not a bad person who does worse things. A good person. And that specific framing is what makes the tragedy hold. Vader is interesting because Anakin was real. Let's actually read the Jedi Code, because I think most people who've seen the films have a vague sense of it without ever sitting with the specific words. There is no emotion, there is peace. There is no ignorance, there is knowledge. There is no passion, there is serenity. There is no chaos, there is harmony. There is no death, there is the Force. That's it, usually 5 lines. And each one is structured the same way, not as a prohibition, but as a replacement. It doesn't say, don't feel emotions. It says, where you might reach for emotion, reach instead for peace. It's framed as a substitution, not a suppression, which is a philosophically meaningful distinction, even if it doesn't always play out that way in practice. The tradition that feels most resonant here is Buddhist philosophy, specifically around the concept of non-attachment. The second noble truth in Buddhism identifies craving as the root of suffering, not the things themselves, not the people we love, not the experiences we have, but the grasping after them, the wanting things to be permanent that aren't permanent. The Jedi Code is circling the same idea from a slightly different angle. Stoicism turns up here as well, actually. The Stoics, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, spent a lot of energy drawing a line between things within your control and things outside it. Your judgments, your responses, your choices, those are yours. What happens to other people, what the world decides to do, whether the people you love live or die, not yours. The suffering comes from confusing one category with the other, which is, in rather compressed form, exactly what Yoda tries to tell Anakin in Revenge of the Sith. Train yourself to let go of everything you fear to lose. Classic Stoic advice, delivered in green. The code has real wisdom in it. I want to be clear about that, because it's easy to look at what happens to Anakin and conclude that the Jedi philosophy was simply wrong, but I don't think that's quite right. There is something genuinely useful in the idea that strong emotions, left unexamined, become a kind of weather that blows you around. Grief can curdle into something destructive. Fear can make you do things you wouldn't otherwise do. The impulse to hold on to things too tightly can cause real harm. These observations are not incorrect. The problem, and there is a real problem, is institutional. The prequel-era Jedi Order took a philosophy of non-attachment and turned it into a culture of emotional suppression, and those aren't the same thing at all. There's a meaningful difference between being encouraged to hold your emotions lightly, to be present with them without being consumed by them, and being told not to form relationships, not to marry, not to love people in ways that risk attachment. The first is wisdom. The second is a fairly rigid set of rules that happens to resemble wisdom from a distance. What's interesting, and a bit damning, is that the Jedi of that era had also become something they never seemed to notice they'd become. Deeply entangled with the Senate, politically central in ways that compromised their neutrality, running a military campaign in the Clone Wars while telling themselves they were peacekeepers. They preached detachment from outcome and then got very attached to the outcome of the Republic's survival. The code said there is no emotion, and meanwhile, the Council was absolutely bristling with institutional defensiveness and wounded pride. Anakin noticed this. He was not wrong to notice it. When the Chancellor places him on the Council as a liaison to the Jedi Council, but the Council refuses to give him the rank of Master, which is an extraordinary slight, essentially using him as a political pawn while withholding the recognition he'd earned, he's justifiably frustrated. He says so to Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan acknowledges it privately and then tells him to do it anyway. That's not mentorship, that's management. There's also the specific problem of what the code asks from someone like Anakin. It asks him to practice non-attachment, but nobody teaches him the practice. They give him the doctrine and not the tools. It's a bit like handing someone a medical textbook and telling them they're a doctor now. The information exists. The capacity to apply it needs to be developed over years with proper support, and Anakin doesn't get that support, especially around the things that matter most to him. And there's one more thing, which I think doesn't get discussed enough. The code ends with, "There is no death, there is the Force." This is meant to be comforting. Death is not the end. Consciousness continues in the Force. The loss is not as total as it feels. But Anakin, whose deepest fear is losing the people he loves, finds precisely no comfort in this. The Force taking someone is still losing them. He doesn't want them to become one with the Force. He wants them there, in front of him. Alive. The Jedi Code, ultimately, is a philosophy built for people who are already somewhat naturally inclined toward detachment, or who have the emotional architecture and the community support to develop it over time. Anakin had neither. He needed something the code wasn't offering, and so he went looking elsewhere. Now let's look at what he found. The Sith Code is the opposite of the Jedi Code in almost every respect, and I mean that literally. It was written as a direct inversion, line by line, and the structure of it makes that obvious once you see it. Where the Jedi Code begins with "there is no emotion," the Sith Code begins with "peace is a lie." Where the Jedi say there is no passion, the Sith say passion is the source of everything. It's a rebuttal, a philosophical argument conducted in competing mantras. Here it is in full. Peace is a lie. There is only passion. Through passion, I gain strength. Through strength, I gain power. Through power, I gain victory. Through victory, my chains are broken. The Force shall free me. On first reading, especially if you're used to the Jedi's framing of the Sith as simply evil, this sounds like a manifesto for selfishness, and there's certainly selfishness in it. But there's more going on philosophically here than pure villainy, and it's worth spending a moment with. The first line, "Peace is a lie," is a challenge to the entire Jedi framework. The Jedi treat peace as the highest state, the goal of all their training, the thing you arrive at when you've properly managed your emotions. The Sith Code says this is false. Not that peace is undesirable, but that it doesn't exist, that the universe is fundamentally in motion, in conflict, in constant change, that the Jedi idea of peace is not a real destination, but a kind of comfortable fiction that stops you from seeing reality clearly. This is actually an argument with some genuine philosophical weight behind it. Heraclitus, the ancient Greek philosopher, said that everything flows, that conflict is the father of all things, that you cannot step in the same river twice. The universe does not tend towards stillness, it tends toward change. The Sith Code, in its first line, is essentially agreeing with Heraclitus. Where it goes after that is more complicated. Through passion, I gain strength. This is the line that most directly opposes Jedi philosophy. Where the Jedi say emotions cloud judgment and should be set aside, the Sith say emotion is the engine. Passion is the thing that drives you to become more than you were. This aligns interestingly with certain romantic philosophical traditions, the idea that authenticity lies in the intensity of your feeling, that a life lived passionately is more real than a life lived in careful, measured restraint. There's something in it, honestly. The image of the Jedi Council, at its worst remote, political, emotionally locked down, slow to respond to obvious manipulation happening right in front of them, doesn't look like the product of passion wisely channeled. It looks like the product of a tradition that valued serenity over engagement for so long that it lost the ability to feel the ground shifting under its feet. But then the code escalates. Strength gives power. Power gives victory. Victory breaks chains. And this is where the logic, which started with something recognizable, becomes something darker. The chain goes: feel deeply, become strong, acquire power, win. Freedom is defined as winning. There's no reference to anyone else's freedom. There's no consideration of what the victory costs those who aren't you. The individual is everything. The collective is scenery. Here's the irony the code never addresses, and it's a significant one. It promises liberation. Through victory, my chains are broken. That's the stated goal. And yet Darth Vader, arguably the most powerful Sith practitioner in the history of the saga, spends decades more completely imprisoned than almost any other character. He's in a suit he can't remove. He's serving a master he can't escape. He's in constant physical pain. The chains are not broken. They're just made of different material. The code also underpins the rule of two, which we'll look at more closely later, and which is itself a kind of cage. Always a master and an apprentice. Always the threat of betrayal in both directions. Never genuine trust, never a relationship of equals. The Sith philosophy of passionate individual liberation produces in practice a power structure built on dominance and fear and suspicion. The chains aren't broken, they're redistributed. What strikes me most about the Sith code, reading it now, is how seductive it sounds if you're in a particular kind of pain. If you've been told that your feelings are liabilities, if you've been failed by institutions that were supposed to protect you, if you're afraid of losing something and every structure around you is telling you to let go rather than helping you hold on. Through passion, I gain strength sounds in that moment, like someone finally telling you that what you feel is real and valid and powerful. And Palpatine is very good at making it sound exactly like that. There's a scene in Revenge of the Sith that I think is one of the most philosophically loaded moments in the entire saga, and it doesn't involve any lightsabers. Anakin goes to Yoda. He's been having nightmares, visions of someone he loves dying. He doesn't say who, and he's terrified in the very specific way that people are terrified when they're not used to being powerless and suddenly are. He tells Yoda he's afraid of losing her to the terror in his dreams. He asks for help, and Yoda says, "Train yourself to let go of everything you fear to lose." I want to sit with that answer for a moment, because I think people's reactions to it tend to split quite cleanly depending on where they are philosophically. Some people hear that and think, yes, exactly, that's wisdom. The Stoic advice, the Buddhist advice. Don't cling. Suffering comes from clinging. Others hear it and think, that is the least useful thing you could possibly say to someone who is afraid their wife is going to die. Both reactions are, I think, correct. The advice is philosophically sound and practically catastrophic. Yoda is right that Anakin's attachment, his specific, desperate clinging to the idea that he can control whether Padme lives, is the thing that will undo him. He's right that the fear of loss is the path to the dark side. He says exactly that, in those words, and he's not wrong. But what he offers Anakin is a conclusion without a method. Train yourself to let go is the destination, not the map. And Anakin has no map. Nobody's ever given him a map. George Lucas, in interviews, explained his thinking about Anakin quite directly. He said, he gets attached to things. He can't let go of his mother. He can't let go of his girlfriend. He can't let go of things. It makes you greedy. And when you're greedy, you are on the path to the dark side, because you fear you're going to lose things, that you're not going to have the power you need. That's the chain, and it's laid out very explicitly in the films if you watch for it. Fear of loss leads to clinging. Clinging creates a need to control. The need to control, frustrated, turns to anger. Anger turns to violence. Violence becomes its own logic. We see the template set in Attack of the Clones, when Anakin's visions of his mother in pain drive him back to Tatooine. He finds her captured by Tusken Raiders, and she dies in his arms. What follows is something the film handles carefully. We don't see what he does, but he tells Padme later, quietly, and with a terrible composure that is arguably more disturbing than distress would be. I killed them all. Not just the men, but the women and the children too. He says this, and she holds his hand, and the film moves on. But this moment is doing a lot of work. Because what it establishes is not just that Anakin did something violent in grief, it's that the rage in him, when the loss is total enough, has no limits. He doesn't stop at the people who took his mother. He keeps going until there's nothing left to kill. And then he comes back and tells Padme, and she stays, and the pattern is not interrupted. When Palpatine approaches him later with the idea that the dark side has the power to prevent death, Anakin is ready to hear it. Not because he's fundamentally evil, because he's exhausted and terrified, and nobody, not Obi-Wan, not the Jedi Council, not the Code, has given him anything that actually helps him carry the weight of what he's afraid of. Palpatine is the first person who suggests that what you feel makes sense and there's something that can help you. That's not an accident. Palpatine has been waiting for exactly this moment. The fear of loss as a mechanism is worth thinking about beyond Anakin's specific case, because it's genuinely one of the more universal human experiences in the saga. Most of us have had some version of the thought, I cannot lose this person, I cannot go through losing this. Sometimes that thought is followed by nothing in particular, just a quiet ache. Sometimes, in certain conditions, when the thought has no safe container and no adequate response, it can bend behaviour in ways that end up causing the very loss it was trying to prevent. There's a version of Anakin's arc that plays out on much smaller scales in ordinary life all the time. The person who is so afraid of losing their relationship that they become controlling in ways that damage it. The person so afraid of grief that they don't allow themselves closeness at all. The fear wraps itself around the thing it loves and squeezes, and eventually the thing is gone anyway, and the fear remains. This is why Yoda's advice, philosophically coherent as it is, needed more to accompany it. Not platitudes, not doctrine, something that could actually metabolize what Anakin was carrying. He never got it, and since we're still in this moment, still with Anakin carrying what he can't put down, there's something specific about how Palpatine approaches all of this that's worth noticing. He doesn't say, the Jedi are wrong and the dark side is right. He doesn't make an ideological pitch. He says, essentially, there is a power that can do the thing you want to do, and the Jedi are keeping it from you. He frames it as withholding, as suppression of knowledge that Anakin has a right to. This is much more effective than ideological argument, because ideological arguments can be debated and rejected. The sense that you've been deceived is harder to argue with. Anakin already felt correctly that the Council wasn't being entirely honest with him. They weren't. They were using him as a spy on Palpatine while telling him this was an honor. They were withholding the rank of Master for political reasons while pretending the decision was purely about his readiness. These were real deceptions, and Anakin knew it. So when Palpatine implies that the Jedi have been holding back knowledge about how to defeat death, it lands differently than it might have with someone who trusted the Council completely. It lands on already prepared ground. This is how effective manipulation works. It finds the true grievances and attaches false solutions to them. The grievances are real. The Jedi did fail Anakin in real ways. The solution, the dark side, Palpatine's guidance, turning against everything and everyone he's known, has nothing to do with the actual problem and everything to do with Palpatine's interests. But by the time you're deep enough in the fear, the distinction stops mattering. Let's talk about Palpatine. Sheev Palpatine, Chancellor of the Republic, later Emperor, also Darth Sidious, is one of the more interesting villains in popular fiction because he's not simply powerful, he's patient. Whatever else you want to say about him, the patience is extraordinary. He's been engineering this moment for decades. He maneuvered himself into a position of political power, cultivated Anakin's trust over years, and waited for the precise moment when Anakin would be frightened enough and desperate enough to hear what he had to say. That kind of patience has a philosophy underneath it. Let's look at what it is. Palpatine's worldview, as it emerges across the prequel trilogy and various expanded canon materials, is essentially this: power is the only real thing. Everything else, democracy, friendship, loyalty, ethics, kindness, is a tool. Tools are useful when they serve the accumulation of power and discardable when they don't. The Republic is a tool. The Jedi Order is an obstacle. Anakin Skywalker is an asset. He's not entirely wrong about some of his more specific observations, and this is what makes him effective. His critique of the Jedi Council, that they've become political actors while claiming to be peacekeepers, that they're not telling Anakin everything they know, that they're using him, has genuine truth in it. The Council is doing exactly this. Palpatine is offering Anakin an accurate reading of one real problem, which makes it much harder to dismiss the inaccurate and catastrophically self-serving solution he attaches to it. The opera scene in Revenge of the Sith is the pivot point, and it's a good one to linger on. Palpatine and Anakin sit in a private box above a strange ethereal performance, and Palpatine tells Anakin the story of Darth Plagueis the Wise, a Sith Lord so powerful that he could use the Force to influence midi-chlorians and prevent death. He says that this knowledge is not a story the Jedi would tell you. It's framed as a legend, a historical anecdote, but it's actually a sales pitch, and a very carefully structured one. He knows Anakin has been having visions of Padme dying. He knows Anakin is terrified. He's telling him, in the gentlest possible register, that there exists a kind of power that could solve exactly the problem Anakin is most afraid of. And then he waits. He doesn't push, he lets the idea settle. This is manipulation at a very high level. Not coercion, not direct instruction. The seed planted, the soil prepared, the patience to let it grow. There's a philosophical tradition associated with thinkers like Machiavelli, and in a different register with Nietzsche, that treats power not as a means to an end, but as the fundamental condition of meaningful existence. In Nietzsche's framework, specifically his concept of will to power, all living things are fundamentally driven to express and expand their capabilities. The question is whether you act on this honestly or disguise it behind moral language that the powerful use to keep the less powerful compliant. Nietzsche was actually critical of nihilism and far more nuanced than he's usually credited for, but his framework gets weaponized in the direction of pure selfishness fairly easily. And Palpatine is a fairly clean example of someone who's done exactly that. He's also worth examining as a study in what certain philosophers call the banality of evil, though in this case it's rather the opposite of banal. Palpatine is not simply cruel for the enjoyment of it. He has an ideology. He genuinely believes that the galaxy needs to be ruled, that democracy is weak and inefficient, that the strong should govern the weak, and that he is among the strong. He's not a nihilist who believes nothing matters. He's a true believer in his own philosophy of power, which is in some ways more disturbing. And here's the thing about Palpatine's relationship with Vader, once Anakin falls. He's a Sith master, and the rule of two says that the apprentice should eventually kill the master. Palpatine knows this. He's planned for it. By the time of the original trilogy, he's already directing Vader to find Luke Skywalker. Not to recruit him exactly, but to assess whether Luke might be a stronger apprentice. He tells Vader to bring Luke before him. He's already running the replacement protocol. Vader, for his part, is well aware of this dynamic. When he tells Luke in The Empire Strikes Back that together they could overthrow the Emperor and rule the galaxy as father and son, this isn't entirely manipulation. He means it. Or at least, it's how Vader sees the next logical step in the Sith tradition, the apprentice growing strong enough to challenge the master. What's interesting is that This is the rule of two working exactly as Darth Bane designed it. The philosophy produces this outcome. The philosophy requires this betrayal. The tragedy of Anakin's relationship with Palpatine is that he trusted the man more than he trusted his own wife, more than he trusted Obi-Wan, more than he trusted anyone, and Palpatine never once offered anything that wasn't in his own interest. He gave Anakin exactly enough to keep him useful, and nothing beyond that. The warmth was a performance. The mentorship was an investment. And by the time Anakin understood this clearly enough to act on it, he'd spent years in an armoured suit being useful for someone else's empire. I want to start this section with the physical reality, because I think people sometimes treat the suit as primarily symbolic and forget that it's also just a suit, a mun that Vader wears for most moments of his life for over 2 decades, that he can rarely remove, that sustains his life through mechanical processes that hurt constantly because the suit was assembled quickly and not gently around a body that had just been catastrophically burned. Various canon sources, the 2017 Darth Vader comic run by Charles Soule is particularly good on this, make clear that the suit causes Vader significant, ongoing physical pain. The nerve connections are imperfect. The interfaces were not designed for comfort. He lives inside a life support system the way you might live inside a hospital, except there's no discharge date, no recovery on the other side, no getting better. This is just what existing is now. That's important to hold on to as we think about Vader philosophically, because the suit is also a cage, a mask, a performance, a symbol. It's doing a lot of work, but it began as a medical necessity imposed on someone who had just lost everything, while he was unconscious and couldn't consent to any. The first thing Anakin Skywalker experiences as Darth Vader is pledging himself to Darth Sidious as his apprentice machine. Now, what does it mean philosophically to live inside a mask? There's a version of this question that touches on some fairly old ideas about identity and performance. The philosopher Erving Goffman spent a lot of time thinking about how people present themselves in social situations, how we manage impressions, adopt roles, shift our performed self depending on who's watching. He called it impression management. The idea is that identity is partly constructed through performance, that who you are is not simply some fixed internal thing, but is also shaped by the roles you inhabit and enact over time. What happens to Vader through this lens is interesting. The suit enforces a particular performance permanently. He cannot not be Darth Vader. He cannot take the mask off in public, cannot make an unguarded facial expression, cannot be seen to be uncertain or soft or simply tired. The suit makes the performance total, and performance, when it becomes total, when there's no backstage, no private self, no version of you that isn't on, does something to identity. The role starts to become the person, or the person starts to disappear into the role. Sometimes both. We get glimpses of the private Vader in canon. In Rogue One and in various other materials, we see the meditation pod, a chamber where the helmet comes off, where for a few moments Vader exists without the mask. He's bald and scarred and pale and distinctly human in a way that the suit completely obscures. In these moments, he looks less like a symbol of power and more like someone who is simply very tired, someone who carries something enormous and cannot set it down. There's a Japanese concept I keep thinking about here: hone and tatamai. Hone is your true feelings and desires, what you actually want and feel. Tatame is what you present to the outside world, the socially expected performance of self. Most people maintain some version of both, shifting between them depending on context. Vader's existence is tatame, with no possibility of hon. There is only the performance. And this is partly by design. Palpatine needs the symbol, as much as the person, maybe more, but it's also partly a consequence of what happened on Mustafar. The private self was burned away. What was rebuilt was armour. One of the things that strikes me about the original trilogy, watching it now, is how Vader communicates. He doesn't argue. He doesn't justify. He states, "I find your lack of faith disturbing. I'm altering the deal. Pray I don't alter it any further. No, I am your father." These are not the speech patterns of someone interested in persuasion or connection. They're the speech patterns of someone who has given up entirely on being understood and settled instead for being obeyed. There's a kind of grief in that, actually. And then in Return of the Jedi, Luke is in front of him, and Luke does something that the mask cannot process. He sees through it, not literally, but morally. He refuses to accept that the mask is all there is. "I know there is good in you still," he says. "The Emperor hasn't driven it from you fully." And Vader's response is nothing. He doesn't say no. He redirects, he evades, but he doesn't contradict it the way he might have contradicted it 5 years earlier. The suit is the most visible manifestation of what the dark side did to Anakin. The dark side, the Sith code says, promises liberation. Through victory, my chains are broken. What it produced instead was a man who cannot live outside his own armour. Something that doesn't get discussed as often as it should is how genuinely, extraordinarily powerful in the Force Darth Vader actually is. Not just in the films, though he's plenty formidable there, but in canon broadly. Palpatine considered Vader the most powerful Force user alive, and also considered Luke Skywalker a potential upgrade. That's how you know Vader's ceiling is enormous. You don't replace someone with a lesser candidate. His midi-chlorian count, established in The Phantom Menace, was higher than any recorded measurement. Higher than Yoda, who was 900 years old and had been practicing his connection to the Force for most of that. The implication is that if Vader had never been injured on Mustafar, if the suit hadn't limited his physical connection to the Force, if the pain hadn't become a constant drain, he might have been more powerful than Palpatine himself. That's a significant what if that the saga raises, and never quite resolves. But here's what I actually want to think about. What is his relationship to the Force, philosophically? What does it mean for him? The Jedi understanding of the Force is fundamentally receptive. It's something to be listened to, flowed with, trusted. Yoda says, "Feel the Force around you," which implies passivity, openness, attunement. The Jedi training is partly about quieting the noise, so that the Force can be heard. It's almost meditative. The Sith relationship to the Force is almost the reverse. It's not something to receive, it's something to use, to impose your will through it. The dark side draws on strong emotion, particularly fear, anger, and hate as fuel. And Vader has plenty of that. What he lacks, for most of his adult life, is the quieter relationship to the Force that might have allowed him some peace. And here's the thing that I find genuinely strange and interesting. Vader is deeply, powerfully connected to something that is, by the way everyone describes it, fundamentally about life. The Force is created by all living things. It binds the galaxy together. It's an energy field created by all living things. And Vader, who has spent decades dealing in death and destruction, is more strongly connected to it than almost anyone alive. That's a contradiction that the saga never quite resolves, and I'm not sure it should. It suggests something about the Force that is less morally clean than light side good, dark side bad. The Force flows through Vader regardless of what he does with it. There's also the matter of his particular sensitivity to others through the Force. In A New Hope, before he has any reason to suspect Luke Skywalker is his son, he senses something unusual about the pilot who destroyed the Death Star. In The Empire Strikes Back, he senses Luke's presence before they've been in the same system. There's a recognition happening at a level below conscious reasoning. Something in him knows what his rational mind hasn't been told. The moment in Return of the Jedi where he reads Luke's emotional state on Endor is worth sitting with. Luke is trying to conceal his presence, staying as quiet in the Force as he can. Vader senses him anyway. And then Vader says something remarkable. He tells Luke that he knows Luke has come to Endor to face him, and that if Luke won't turn to the dark side, perhaps his sister will. He's threatening to use Leia, and this makes Luke angry, furious actually, and Luke attacks him right there, which is, of course, exactly what Vader intended. He reached through the Force and found Luke's most vulnerable point and pressed on it. This is the dark side as emotional intelligence weaponized. It's a horrible thing to do to your own child, but it's also extraordinarily perceptive. Vader knows that Luke's attachment to Leia is exactly the same kind of attachment that brought Anakin down, and he uses that knowledge precisely. Whether this counts as him understanding his own past as some small flicker of self-awareness about the mechanism. The film does not explicitly state or show that Vader understands the mechanism of his fall. I don't know. The film doesn't say, but I find it haunting, the idea that Vader knows exactly how love can be used as a lever, because love was the lever used on him. There's also something worth saying about the specific quality of Vader's presence as a Force user that is distinct from raw power. He is not erratic, he is not flashy. Compared to, say, Darth Maul, who fights with gymnastic aggression and visible relish, Vader is economical, almost unhurried. He moves through a duel the way he moves through a corridor, with that same absolute lack of urgency, as if he's already seen how it ends, and is simply waiting for the other person to catch up. This economy of movement is itself a kind of philosophical statement. It says, I have nothing to prove. I don't need to perform my power because my power is not in question. The Jedi he fights in the prequel era sometimes try to outmaneuver him with speed and agility. The Vader of the original trilogy doesn't seem particularly bothered. He blocks what needs blocking and advances when he chooses to advance. The duel with Obi-Wan in A New Hope is interesting for this reason. Kenobi says to him, I've been waiting for you, Obi-Wan. We meet again at last. The circle is now complete. When I left you, I was but the learner. Now I am the master. And Obi-Wan replies, only a master of evil, Darth. And then they fight, and it's slow and measured, and somewhat awkward by later Star Wars standards. And Obi-Wan eventually stops fighting and allows himself to become one with the Force. What Vader seems to take from this is nothing visible. He watches Obi-Wan disappear, he strikes the empty robes, and then Luke is screaming his name, and Vader simply turns and goes. No triumph, no apparent satisfaction, nothing that looks like what you'd expect from someone who has just killed the man who trained him, defeated him, and left him for dead on a lava riverbank 20 years ago. Whether this suggests that whatever he might have felt about Obi-Wan has been buried completely, or whether Vader simply doesn't permit himself the experience of feelings around that, I can't say. But the blankness of it is notable. One of the things that I think gets flattened in the popular reception of Vader is the assumption that he's simply a servant of evil, that he does what he does because he's been corrupted, and the corruption is the whole story. But that's not quite right. Vader has genuine political beliefs. He thinks the Empire is, on balance, better than what came before. He's wrong about this, clearly, in fairly significant ways, but the belief is real. Anakin's frustration with the Republic and the Jedi was not manufactured by Palpatine from nothing. It existed before Palpatine ever turned it to his purposes. The Senate across the prequel trilogy is depicted as almost exactly as dysfunctional as Anakin thinks it is, gridlocked, corrupt, incapable of decisive action, easily manipulated by financial interests. The separatist crisis is partly a genuine political failure that the Senate cannot respond to effectively. Anakin watches this from the front lines of a war that the Republic seems structurally incapable of ending, and he develops views about governance. He believes in order, not in the abstract, not as ideology, but as a practical conviction, that the galaxy needs someone to make decisions and enforce them, rather than watching thousands of senators argue indefinitely while people suffer. This is not, historically speaking, an unusual political position. The appeal of strong centralized authority has been significant in many societies and many periods. and it's often strongest when the alternative is perceived as chaos. Whether or not the diagnosis is correct, the fear of disorder is real. What Vader and Palpatine more consciously offer is certainty in place of debate. TIA does what it decides to do, at least at the highest levels. It does what it decides to do. It's not interested in consensus. And there is something in that which appeals to someone like Anakin, who grew up in a situation where powerlessness was the defining condition of existence, and who spent his Jedi career watching institutions move too slowly to prevent harm. The Empire's methods, of course, are Grand Moff Tarkin, who is, in a way, the cleaner expression of imperial political philosophy than Vader, because he's not a Force user and has no personal mythology, says plainly in A New Hope that fear will keep the local systems in line, the only reliable way to govern, that the regional governors keep order through the fear of this battle station, meaning the Death Star, rule by terror, the threat of annihilation as a substitute for legitimate authority. Vader, interestingly, doesn't seem entirely comfortable with this. He doesn't. In A New Hope, Admiral Motti dismisses a general who raises the concern that the Rebel Alliance is a military threat, and Vader does not object, but the scene plays strangely. When the Death Star is used to destroy Alderaan, a planetary genocide to demonstrate power, Vader is present but not driving the moment. Tarkin gives the order. Vader has, as he often does, complicated feelings that remain behind the mask. He believes in the Force as a governing principle in a way that pure materialists like Tarkin don't. He tells the officers around him that the ability to destroy a planet is insignificant next to the power of the Force, and he means it. His vision of order has the Force at the center, the powerful imposing their will, not arbitrarily, but through a kind of cosmic authority. This is where the Sith philosophy and the political philosophy merge. The strong rule because the Force flows most strongly through them, and the Force's strength is self-justifying. It's a circular logic, and it produces circular results. You are justified in ruling because you're powerful. Your power justifies itself. There is no appeal beyond it, no accountability outside it, nothing that can check it, which is ultimately why empires built on this logic tend to be brittle. They're held together by the continued dominance of the person at the top, and the moment that dominance wavers, everything comes apart. The Empire falls eventually, partly because Vader makes a choice in the Death Star's throne room that is not strategic, not imperial, not in service of order. It's simply the choice of a father who cannot watch his son be killed. And that act of individual, particular love, which is absolutely not what the Sith Code prescribes, undoes the entire thing. There's something almost comic in that, from a philosophical perspective. The most powerful expression of imperial order in the galaxy, defeated not by a better army or a superior strategy, but by one person deciding that this specific individual mattered more than the system. And there's something in Vader's very specific relationship to the officers around him that illuminates the limits of rule by fear as a political philosophy. The officers who serve on his ships are, by and large, competent professionals. They're not there because they love him or believe in him in any personal sense. They're there because the Empire has power, and Vader sits near the top of it, and working under that power is the best available option for a certain kind of career military person. Their loyalty is entirely instrumental. This means that when things go badly enough, when the power starts to look less permanent, when the Empire starts to crack, that instrumental loyalty evaporates. There's no deeper bond to hold it. Vader has never built one, because building one would require acknowledging that the people around him are in fact people, that they matter in some way beyond their function, and that's the one concession his philosophy, as it currently stands, doesn't have room for. The contrast with Luke's alliance is worth noting briefly. The Rebel Alliance is, in certain ways, less powerful and less organised, but the people in it believe in something. They're there because they chose to be, because the cause matters to them, and that makes them considerably harder to defeat than an organization held together purely by the fear of what happens if they underperform. Here's a bit of lore that matters more than it initially seems. A millennium before the events of Star Wars, a Sith Lord named Darth Bane looked at what the Sith Order had become, hundreds of practitioners constantly fighting each other for dominance, endlessly fracturing and consuming themselves, and concluded that this was unsustainable. The philosophy of passion and individual power, practiced by large numbers of people simultaneously, produced only chaos. So he dismantled it. He killed the other Sith, absorbed their power and knowledge, and established what became the defining rule of Sith tradition for the next 1,000 years. 2, only ever 2. One master, one apprentice, one to embody power, one to crave it. The logic of it is actually elegant in a grim way. By limiting the Sith to 2, Bane removed the problem of factional infighting, and by designing the structure around the expectation of betrayal, the apprentice is supposed to eventually kill the master. When they've grown strong enough, he channeled the Sith's natural selfishness productively. The apprentice's ambition, rather than fragmenting the order, sharpens both parties. The master pushes the apprentice hard because a weak apprentice is useless. The apprentice trains relentlessly because killing the master is the only path forward. It's also, when you look at it from the inside, a profoundly lonely existence. Think about what the rule of 2 actually requires Vader to experience, relationally. He has one relationship in the galaxy that operates at anything like his level, with Palpatine, and that relationship is structurally adversarial. He cannot trust Palpatine because Palpatine's role in the Sith tradition is to be the thing he eventually overthrows. Palpatine cannot trust him for the same reason in reverse. They're bound together by utility and by the tradition, not by anything resembling genuine regard. Every warmth Palpatine shows is calculated. Every deference Vader offers is provisional. Below Vader, there's the military command structure of the Empire, officers and generals and admirals who serve him and fear him, and occasionally try to undermine him politically, though they don't get very far. These are not relationships. These are subordinates. Vader doesn't confide in them, doesn't ask their opinions on things that matter, doesn't care what they think of him beyond whether they're doing their jobs. The ones who don't do their jobs, he kills. This sets a fairly clear ceiling on the emotional quality of the working environment. There's no horizontal relationship in Vader's life. No peers, no one who exists at the same level and is simply alongside him without either serving him or dominating him. No friendship, no community of equals. This is partly the nature of the Sith position, and partly the nature of what Anakin became after Mustafar, someone who has armoured himself so completely against intimacy that the armour is literal as well as psychological. Loneliness is philosophically interesting here because of what it does to a person's sense of reality. We understand ourselves partly through other people, through being seen, through being contradicted, through the resistance and warmth and friction of genuine relationship. When you remove all of that, certain distortions start to creep in. The Vader of the original trilogy does not seem like someone who receives accurate feedback about himself. He exists in an environment of complete deference from below and pure manipulation from above, which is not a healthy epistemic situation for anyone. There's a moment in The Empire Strikes Back that I think about sometimes in this context. Vader is meditating alone in his chamber. The helmet is off, the suit partially open. This is one of the rare private moments, and he's in communication with the Emperor about Luke Skywalker. The Emperor says Luke could be a great asset or a great threat. Vader suggests that perhaps Luke could be turned to the dark side, and there's something in how Vader says this, something almost hopeful underneath the political language that suggests this isn't purely strategic calculation. He wants his son near him, even if the language he has available for expressing this is the language of the Sith. This is what the rule of 2 produces when it meets someone who, underneath everything, is actually deeply relational. A person who went to the dark side originally because he couldn't bear to lose the people he loved. Now he exists in a structure that makes love impossible and loneliness total. And somewhere under the mask, that irony is present and enormous and unspoken. Bane's rule of two is, in a certain light, the Sith philosophy applied to relationships. Concentrate the connection, make it adversarial, ensure it sharpens rather than comforts, which is philosophically consistent with the code, strength through passion, power through strength, but which produces something very bleak in practice. The loneliest man in the galaxy is the most powerful man in the galaxy. These two facts are not unrelated. And here's a detail that gets overlooked, which is that Vader, for all of his isolation, seems to actively maintain it. He doesn't seek subordinates who might become genuine companions. He doesn't cultivate relationships that could offer something beyond utility. Admiral Piet, who serves under him for years, is competent and apparently sensible, and Vader neither destroys him for incompetence, nor, in any way visible on screen, acknowledges him as a person. He is a function. His name in the context of the bridge might as well be Admiral who reports current status. There's something familiar in this too. If you've ever been around people who have been very badly hurt and have decided, not always consciously, that the safest thing is to keep everyone at functional distance. It doesn't come from cruelty, or at least not primarily. It comes from the calculation, usually unexamined, that letting someone matter means giving them the power to cause the particular kind of pain that can't be deflected by armor, literal or otherwise. Vader is, in this reading, someone who has decided that the best protection against loss is to not have anything to lose. And since he can't quite manage that where Luke is concerned, can't get the attachment to stop, he tries to convert it into something else, into recruitment, into the project of turning Luke to the dark side. If Luke is a Sith apprentice, he's useful. Useful things don't occupy the same emotional register as love things, at least in theory. It doesn't work, but it's a recognizable attempt. This is the section where I get to do the thing I've been gently gesturing toward for the last several sections, which is actually stop and compare all of this to real-world philosophy. And I know that sounds dry when I put it like that, but I promise it's actually quite fun at this hour, in this kind of context. Or at least I find it fun. You might be asleep by now, which is entirely the point. Let's start with Nietzsche, because he's the most obvious and also the most frequently misunderstood. Friedrich Nietzsche, the 19th century German philosopher who wrote with extraordinary energy and is often co-opted by people who haven't actually read him, developed a concept he called will to power. The phrase tends to get grabbed and used to justify selfishness, domination, the idea that the strong should do whatever they want, but that's not really what Nietzsche meant. What he meant was something closer to all living things fundamentally strive to express and expand their capabilities, to grow, to become more fully what they are. The will to power is not about dominating other people. It's about self-overcoming, the constant movement toward becoming a more complete version of yourself. He also drew a distinction between what he called master morality and slave morality. Master morality, in Nietzsche's framing, is self-generated. The strong define good and bad from their own internal standards. They call what affirms their strength good, and what diminishes it bad. Slave morality, by contrast, is reactive. It defines itself against the powerful, calling the strength of the strong evil and elevating weakness and suffering into virtues. You can see why this framework gets associated with the Sith. The Sith code is essentially master morality. The strong define their own values, passion and power are celebrated. The idea of suppressing your emotions to comply with an external code is treated as weakness. But here's where it gets complicated. Nietzsche would not actually have admired the Sith or Palpatine or what Vader became. His ideal figure, the Übermensch, the Overman, is someone who creates new values out of genuine self-knowledge and strength, not someone who simply dominates others out of fear and resentment. And both Palpatine and Vader are, in their different ways, deeply driven by resentment and fear. Palpatine resents anyone who might rival him. Vader is driven by grief that curdled into control. These are reactive stances, not the sovereign self-creation Nietzsche was describing. The Sith take Nietzschean tools and use them for profoundly un-Nietzschean purposes. Now Plato. The Jedi are much more Platonic in their orientation, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Plato, being Plato, divided the soul into three parts. What he called the rational, logos, which seeks truth and makes good decisions, the spirited, thymos, where honour and ambition and strong feeling live. And then there's the appetitive, epithymia, all the wanting and craving and desiring, the part that goes looking for things and doesn't stop when you tell it to. His ideal was a soul where the rational part runs the show, the spirited backs it up, and the appetitive is kept in check. When the appetites run the show, when desire and fear and attachment drive decision-making, you get disorder, suffering, and harm. This is, almost word for word, the Jedi philosophy. Emotions exist, Plato doesn't deny they exist, but they should be subordinated to reason and wisdom. Attachment is an appetite, and appetites need managing. The tragedy of Anakin is, in Platonic terms, a soul disordered by the appetitive. His love for his mother, his love for Padme, his fear of loss, all appetites in this framing, overwhelm his rational capacity for good judgment, and the result is catastrophe. But here's where Plato becomes uncomfortable for the Jedi, and where Aristotle is perhaps more useful. Aristotle disagreed with his teacher about emotion. For Aristotle, emotions aren't simply liabilities to be managed. They're sources of important information. Appropriate emotion is part of virtue. You should feel angry about injustice. You should feel grief at genuine loss. The question is whether the emotion is proportionate and whether it leads to appropriate action. A person who felt nothing at the suffering of others wouldn't be a sage. They'd be deficient. The Jedi Code, at its worst, produces Aristotle's nightmare. People who have suppressed their emotional responses so thoroughly that they don't feel things appropriately anymore, and consequently can't perceive certain important truths. The Council's failure to notice Palpatine's manipulation is partly a political failure, but it's also a failure of emotional attunement. They've been so committed to serenity that they've lost the capacity to feel alarmed. And then the Stoics, who turn up in Star Wars in ways that I think deserve a bit more credit than they usually get. The Stoics, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, built a philosophy around a central distinction. What is up to us, our judgments, desires, actions, and what is not up to us, external events, other people's choices, outcomes in the world. The only path to equanimity, they argued, is to care deeply about the first category and hold the second lightly. You can act to influence the world, but you should not make your peace of mind dependent on outcomes you can't control. Seek not that the things which happen should happen as you wish, but wish the things which happen to be as they are, and you will have a tranquil flow of life, Epictetus says. Yoda's advice to Anakin in that scene, train yourself to release what you fear losing, is Stoic advice, literally. Epictetus would have approved. The problem, as I said when we were in the middle of Anakin's fall, is that Stoic philosophy is a full practice, developed over time with genuine philosophical community and personal discipline. It's not a thing you can say to someone in crisis and have them apply on the spot. Anakin needed the philosophy and the tools to develop it, and he got only the conclusion. The fact that Star Wars is drawing from all of these traditions simultaneously, Eastern non-attachment, Western stoicism, Platonic reason over appetite, Nietzschean will and power, is part of why it has stayed philosophically interesting for 50 years. George Lucas was deliberately working with mythology and philosophy as raw materials. Joseph Campbell's influence is well documented, but the conversations that the film stage between the Jedi Code and the Sith Code are genuinely worth having, because they're conversations between real philosophical positions with real philosophical stakes. Luke Skywalker keeps making the same mistakes as his father. This doesn't get pointed out quite enough. In The Empire Strikes Back, Yoda and Obi-Wan tell him, in fairly explicit terms, not to go to Cloud City. He'll be walking into a trap. He's not ready. His training isn't complete. If he goes, he may well doom the rebellion and everyone in it. And Luke, who has just had a vision of his friend's suffering, says, I understand, but I have to go. And he goes. And it is indeed a trap. He loses his hand, he nearly dies, he learns Vader is his father, and he ends up dangling from an antenna below Cloud City, being rescued by Leia. The mission is, by most measures, a failure. He acted out of love, out of attachment to his friends, out of fear of losing them, and it cost him and them significantly. This is almost exactly what Anakin did. The Jedi told Anakin not to act on his fear. He did. It went badly. The pattern repeats. What's different, what makes Luke's story go differently in the end, is not that he stops caring or forms fewer attachments. He never does that, and the films never suggest he should. What's different is what he does with the caring when it matters most. Return of the Jedi is built around a series of choices that are, when you look at them closely, philosophically extraordinary. Luke surrenders to Vader rather than fighting him. He goes to the Emperor's throne room, not to fight the Emperor, but to refuse to fight. The plan, if you can call it a plan, seems to be, believe that there is still good in Vader and act on that belief and see what happens. There's no guarantee, there's no strategy, it's an act of faith. When Luke tells Vader, I know there is good in you, the Emperor hasn't driven it from you fully. He's not making an argument. He's not making an argument. He's not presenting evidence. He's saying, I believe this, and I'm willing to stake my life on it. And then he puts down his lightsaber. This is the opposite of what Anakin did with Padme. Anakin's love for Padme was grasping. He needed to control whether she lived, needed the power to determine the outcome. And when that control seemed threatened, he made increasingly catastrophic choices to try to secure it. Luke's love for his father is open-handed. He's not trying to force an outcome. He's simply present and willing and clear. There's a philosophical tradition, found in various forms in religious thought, in certain strands of existentialism, in the ethics of care, that distinguishes between love as possession and love as gift. Possessive love needs the beloved to remain certain, safe, unchanged, always there. It claws, it controls. It cannot tolerate the beloved's freedom because freedom means the possibility of loss. Love as gift is different. It gives without requiring return, stays present without demanding permanence, is genuinely interested in the other person's flourishing rather than in its own security. Anakin loved with the possessive kind. Luke loves with the other kind. And it's not that Luke is simply a better person. He had advantages Anakin didn't, including no institutions that told him love was a weakness, including mentors who, while imperfect, at least modelled some version of care. It's also partly that Luke grew up away from all of this and came to it relatively fresh. The scene in the throne room escalates. Palpatine orders Luke to kill Vader and take his place. Luke refuses. Palpatine then begins torturing Luke with Force lightning. He's dying on the floor, and Vader is standing there watching, and the film holds on his face, the mask, the breathing, for a long moment that asks everything. And then Vader grabs the Emperor and throws him into the reactor shaft. What is that act philosophically? It's not a Sith move. It's not strategic. A Sith executing the rule of two correctly would replace the Master at the opportune moment with calculation and preparation. This is not calculated. This is immediate, unthinking, visceral. He cannot watch his son die. That's it. That's the whole thing. Anakin Skywalker went to the dark side in an act of desperate love. He couldn't let Padme die, and he broke everything trying to prevent it. He comes back to himself in an act of love that mirrors the first. He cannot let Luke die, but the result is completely different. Because this time, he's not trying to control the outcome. He's not grasping. He's simply acting from what he is, from what remains of him. Whether this constitutes full redemption is something reasonable people can disagree about. The galaxy that suffered under the Empire would have thoughts, but within the internal logic of the saga, it means that Anakin Skywalker survived inside Darth Vader, quietly, buried. And what Luke's love did was not manufacture that goodness, but simply believe in, "I know there is good in you," Luke says, before facing the Emperor. Luke says when Vader is dying, "You were right about me," Anakin says. "Not about the Jedi, not about the Force, about me specifically. You saw something true about this particular person." That exchange quietly is one of the loveliest things in the saga. There is a version of the Vader story that doesn't get to resolve, and it belongs to Leia. Leia Organa is, by the events of A New Hope, one of the most capable people in the Rebel Alliance. A senator, a spy, a woman who endures torture under Vader's direction on the Devastator and tells him nothing. She watches the destruction of Alderaan, the planet she grew up on, the people she loved, and she keeps it together and keeps going. She has, by any measure, a remarkable resilience. What she doesn't know for most of her life is that the man who tortured her is her father. What Vader doesn't know, when he questions her, is the same thing. This is one of the stranger elements of the saga if you sit with it. Vader interrogates Leia in A New Hope and feels nothing particular, or at least nothing that registers as recognition. She's a rebel senator who has information he needs. That's the whole of it. The Force, which was sensitive enough to recognize Luke across interstellar distances in The Empire Strikes Back, offers Vader nothing when he's in the same room as his daughter. Whether this is a continuity issue or something more intentional, I genuinely don't know. But I find the result philosophically interesting regardless, because it means that Vader causes Leia enormous harm, her home planet is destroyed, she watches everyone she has ever known die, she is imprisoned and tortured, and he does all of this in complete ignorance of who she is to him. He never gets the information that would have recontextualized any of it. He discovers she exists in Return of the Jedi when he reads Luke's emotions and feels the presence of a sister. His response is to immediately suggest using her as leverage. This is Vader functioning as Vader, cold calculation, the logic of the Sith, people as instruments. Whether there's something underneath that, whether, on some level, the recognition produces anything besides tactical thinking, the film doesn't tell us, and then he dies without ever having spoken a word to her as her father. The absence of reconciliation between Vader and Leia is important, I think, because it resists a particular kind of narrative tidiness. The Anakin-Luke story resolves. It's moving and complete. The Anakin-Leia story doesn't. The harm he did to her, the destruction of her world, the torture, the years of terrorizing the galaxy that shaped her entire life, and the lives of everyone she fought for, goes unaddressed by him, because he never lives long enough to address it. He doesn't know, and then he's gone. The expanded canon takes this seriously, in ways I appreciate. Leia's knowledge of her parentage, she finds out before Return of the Jedi, in various materials, is a private grief she carries. She's looked at this man, this symbol of everything the Empire is, and she knows he's her father, and she feels nothing uncomplicated about it. Not relief, not warmth, something far more difficult. There's a philosophical tradition around what we might call unresolvable harm. Harm that cannot be fully acknowledged, apologized for, repaired, because the circumstances won't permit it. Victims of people who die before any reckoning can occur. Children of parents who never understood what they did. The incompleteness is real, and it can't be fixed by the resolution that others get. Leia is Star Wars' most prominent example of this. Luke gets to hear, "You were right about me." Leia gets nothing. The saga redeems Anakin Skywalker through his relationship with his son, and Leia holds the part of the story that doesn't get redeemed. I don't think this is an oversight. I think it's honest. There's an interview that Carrie Fisher gave. I believe it was sometime in the later years of her life, around the time of The Force Awakens, where she talked about what it meant to her, personally, to play a character who carried so much and showed so little of the strain of it. She spoke about Leia's capacity to keep going in the face of losses that would have undone most people. And she said something that stuck with me, which is that Leia's strength was never about not feeling things. It was about feeling things and moving anyway. That feels relevant to the specific burden Leia carries in relation to Vader. She doesn't get to not feel it. She feels it and moves anyway, which is a different thing entirely from being unaffected. In the expanded canon materials, specifically the novel Bloodline by Claudia Gray, which I think is underrated, Leia's parentage becomes public knowledge in the years between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens, and it derails her political career. People who had fought beside her for decades suddenly cannot see her independently of her father. She is, to them, Darth Vader's daughter first and Leia Organa second, and nothing she has done in the intervening years quite dislodges that. The harm Vader did to the galaxy catches up with her, posthumously, in this very specific and unfair way. This is also, I think, philosophically real. The consequences of what people do don't respect the arc of their own story. Vader's redemption doesn't undo the political damage he caused, doesn't undo the fear he generated, doesn't undo what his name means to the people who suffered under it. He gets to resolve his story on his own terms. The people living in the aftermath of what he was don't get that option. In the years between Revenge of the Sith and Rogue One, Darth Vader builds a fortress. He does not build it somewhere convenient, somewhere pleasant, somewhere strategically optimal. He builds it on Mustafar. If you haven't quite internalized what Mustafar is in the geography of these films, it's a volcanic planet, covered in lava flows, dark, hot, inimical to comfort. It's also the place where Obi-Wan Kenobi defeated Anakin Skywalker, where Anakin burned, where everything ended and what Vader was built on top of began. It is, without question, the worst place in the galaxy for Anakin Skywalker to spend any voluntary time. And Vader goes there regularly. He has his castle built on the banks of a lava river. He meditates there. Canon materials suggest Mustafar became over time strong with the dark side of the Force, partly because of Vader's sustained presence, grief and rage and pain left in the landscape, the way water leaves deposits in stone. This strikes me as one of the most psychologically revealing things in the whole saga, and it doesn't appear in the original films at all. It's buried in the expanded canon, offered up quietly, without much fanfare, and yet it says something enormous about who Vader is. He doesn't want to forget. Most approaches to psychological self-preservation after catastrophic loss involve some version of moving away, not forgetting exactly, but not actively returning to the site of the wound. You don't typically choose to build your home on the exact spot where the worst thing that ever happened to you happened. And yet Vader does. He goes back to Mustafar. He sits in the darkness there. He stays on Mustafar for many years. There are a few ways you could read this. The most straightforward, the dark side draws power from strong emotion, and Mustafar's association with the most intense pain Vader has ever experienced makes it a useful place for dark side practice. The anger and grief that the location produces in him are fuel. This is the Sith explanation, and it has a certain internal logic, but I think there's something else happening alongside it, which is grief as a site rather than grief as a passage. Most cultural frameworks around grief imagine it as something that moves. The stages model, the journey metaphor, the idea that you travel through it towards some further place, but some grief doesn't move that way. Some grief is geographical. It's a place you return to, not because returning helps, not because the landscape offers resolution, but because the returning is a way of acknowledging that the loss is real. Vader goes back to Mustafar because on some level, he has not left. Anakin Skywalker never left Mustafar. His last act as Anakin was when he chose to save his son and cast the Emperor down to his death. The fortress is not a monument to power, though it looks like one. It's a monument to what happened there. It's enormous and dark and built on a wound, and nobody around Vader quite understands why he chose that location, and he doesn't explain it, because Vader doesn't explain himself to anyone. The specific architecture of the fortress is worth a small mention. It's called Fortress Vader in some canon materials, and it's designed apparently, according to the architect who built it, after being compelled to by Vader, to tap into a dark side vergence on the planet. A kind of nexus of dark side energy connected to an ancient gate. Some of this goes into fairly esoteric lore territory, but the visual impression is what matters for our purposes. It is enormous, black, sharp-edged, surrounded by fire and darkness, and it sits at the edge of a lava river the way a monument sits at the edge of a cliff. It is not built to be comfortable, it is built to endure. There's a quote sometimes attributed to various sources, the sentiment shows up in grief literature fairly often, that says something like, "Grief is just love with nowhere to go." You loved something and now it's gone, and the love doesn't have anywhere to put itself, so it just stays, displaced, present, in ways that don't resolve. Vader's love for Padme didn't go anywhere. His love for the life he thought he could have, the family, the future, the person he was supposed to become, didn't go anywhere either. It stayed on Mustafar, and he built a fortress around it. Whether that's tragic or simply honest, I'm not sure it matters to distinguish. The fortress also does something architecturally that I find interesting from a purely aesthetic standpoint. Vader does not build something modest. He builds something enormous and dark and impossible to ignore. This is, in miniature, what the armour does too. It makes the grief very large and very black and very visible, while keeping the specifics of it completely hidden. Nobody looking at Fortress Vader on Mustafar knows why it's there. It dominates the landscape without explaining itself, which is, when you think about it, a fairly accurate description of grief in general. Something that large, occupying that position, in that location, it changes the landscape around it. Other things have to accommodate it. The lava flows around it. The force itself seems to pool there. Vader has made his grief permanent in the topography of a planet, and the planet has adjusted. There is something almost admirable about this level of honesty, in a strange way. Vader does not pretend that Mustafar is simply the most strategically convenient location for a fortress. He goes back because something there is his, and he wants to keep it, even if what's his is pain, even if returning cost him something every time. Most of us with smaller griefs at least have the option to move. Vader goes back anyway. Return of the Jedi builds toward a question it never quite states directly. Is Darth Vader redeemable? And then it answers it. But the answer is more complicated than the emotional resolution of the scene makes it feel. Let's look at what actually happens. Vader brings Luke to Palpatine aboard the Death Star. Luke refuses to fight his father, refuses to strike down the Emperor, and eventually ends up on the floor being killed by Force lightning, while Vader stands and watches. And then Vader acts. He picks up Palpatine and throws him into the reactor shaft, and Palpatine dies, and the Empire's central power structure collapses with him. Vader is fatally wounded in the process. Luke gets his helmet off, and they speak. And Anakin dies looking at his son with his own eyes. That's the sequence. What it means is the question. There's a theological concept found in various forms across religious traditions of deathbed conversion. The idea that a person can, in their final moments, turn from the path they've walked and be received differently, in in whatever comes after. There's always been theological debate about this. Is it genuine? Can a life of harm be cancelled by a single late act? Does intention in the final moment matter more than the accumulation of years? The secular philosophical version of this question is about moral identity and change. Can someone become a different person? Not just perform a different act, but actually undergo a genuine transformation in who they are and what they value? And if so, what does that require? Anakin's act in the throne room is, I think, not best understood as a philosophical conversion. He doesn't suddenly acquire a new system of values. He doesn't renounce the dark side in some abstract ideological sense. What happens is simpler and stranger, and in a way, more honest than that. He cannot watch his son die. That's it. The thing that overrides everything else, the armor, the decades, the ideology, the fear, is specific and immediate and personal. Not a principle, a person. Luke, specifically. This mirrors what brought him to the dark side in the first place. Then he couldn't watch Padme die, and that incapacity broke the world. Now he can't watch Luke die, and that incapacity fixes it. Same mechanism, different direction. The love that made Anakin dangerous also, eventually, made him something else. There's something philosophically interesting here about the relationship between abstract conviction and immediate experience. We tend to think of moral change as something that happens at the level of belief. You come to hold different values, and then you act differently. But there's another model associated with certain strands of virtue ethics and also with some strands of moral psychology, where change happens at the level of response before it happens at the level of belief. You act differently first, from instinct, from care, from something immediate, and the beliefs follow, or sometimes don't need to follow because the act was already the thing. Anakin doesn't have time to develop a new philosophical framework. He has about 30 seconds. What he has is his son on the floor in front of him, and the response that comes from whatever Anakin Skywalker still is, buried under everything. And that response is enough. Whether it constitutes redemption in a full moral sense is genuinely up for debate, and I think that debate is worth having without rushing to a comfortable conclusion. The galaxy suffered enormously under Vader's 2 decades of service to the Empire. The individual acts of harm are uncountable. The death of Alderaan alone, a planet, billions of people, sits in that ledger forever. One act in a throne room does not address Alderaan. It cannot. What the saga offers, I think, is not a claim that the ledger balances. It's something narrower and more precise. Anakin Skywalker was in there. The specific person who loved his mother and his wife and built a droid in a desert was never entirely erased. Luke was right about that. And at the end, that person acted. The Force ghost who appears at the end of Return of the Jedi, young Anakin, in Jedi robes, standing beside Yoda and Obi-Wan, is canonically Anakin restored to the self he was before the fall. Whether this is literally how the Force works, or whether it's a visual metaphor, it's the film's statement about what survived. Not Darth Vader, Anakin. The one who chose, when choice was finally actually available to him, to save his son. Luke removes the mask at the end, and it matters that he does this. He doesn't let his father die as Vader. He insists on seeing who's there. "I've got to save you," he says, and Anakin says, "You already have." Whatever you think about redemption as a concept, that exchange knows what it's doing. Darth Vader has been dead in the Star Wars timeline for decades by the time of the sequel trilogy, and he is still everywhere. His grandson wears a helmet fashioned to resemble the mask. A cult ex-Kylo Ren, Ben Solo, Han and Leia's son, has come into possession of the melted remnants of Vader's helmet, scavenged from the pyre where Vader was burned on the Endor forest, and he keeps it in his quarters and speaks to it. Teva pyre Vader was burned on in the Endor forest, and he keeps it in his quarters and speaks to it. Literally speaks to it, as if Vader might answer. This is how we know that something Vader represented outlasted what he actually was. Ben Solo never met his grandfather. He was born after Endor. What he knows of Vader is mythology, reputation, the cultural residue of terror and power. And he wants it. He wants to be what he imagines Vader was, certain, powerful, unencumbered by doubt, the darkness without the grief underneath it. It's a profound misreading, and also a very recognizable one. We tend to inherit from the past not the person, but the symbol. Ben Solo inherits the armor, not the man who wore it and what it cost him. He takes the image of implacable power and misses entirely the 9-year-old in the desert who built things because he couldn't free his mother. Which is perhaps inevitable. We're rarely given the full picture of the complicated, wounded people who become symbols. There's a philosophical concept sometimes called the problem of legacy, how the meaning of a life escapes the control of the person who lived it. Vader cannot control what he means to the galaxy after he's gone. He cannot ensure that what Ben Solo takes from him is the part that finally chose love over fear, rather than the part that spent 20 years killing. He cannot revise the record, he cannot add the context, he is gone, and what remains is whatever the galaxy makes of him, which is predominantly the armor. The Force ghost at the end of Return of the Jedi looks like a resolution. Young Anakin, serene, returned to himself, standing in the light. And for Luke, in that moment, it probably Leia, somewhere on Endor, is celebrating the end of the Empire, knowing at last why it ended, and at least in part what it cost the man who ended it, and what he was to her. The Empire without knowing why it ended, or what it cost the man who ended it, or what he was to her. She'll find out eventually. What she'll do with that knowledge is something the sequel trilogy handles with characteristic unevenness. But the gap between the resolution Luke gets and the unresolved thing Leia carries, that gap is real, and the saga earns it by not pretending it away. There's also the question of what legacy Vader's story leaves for us watching it, which is a slightly different thing. I think the most honest thing I can say about it is this. He's a story about what happens when the wrong help arrives at the right moment. A manipulation built entirely out of what someone was most afraid of. And that's what makes it a tragedy rather than a horror story. Horror is about things that are monstrous. Tragedy is about things that are human. Vader is human. Enormously, painfully, recognizably human. Underneath the armor and the breathing and the 40 years of marketing. And that's what keeps people coming back. There's also the specific question of what the Vader mythology does for the people who find it meaningful, in less obviously ideological ways, who aren't building cults or wearing helmets, but who just find something in the story that lands somewhere personal. This is harder to articulate, but I think it's real. Part of it, I suspect, is that Vader's story validates a certain truth about people. That terrible things and good things can coexist in the same person, that someone who has caused great harm can still contain something that matters, that the person you were is not always entirely cancelled by the person you became. This is philosophically complicated, morally tricky, and emotionally very powerful. We want it to be true, not as an excuse for harm, not as a way of letting people off the hook, but because we are all, to some degree, composites of better and worse versions of ourselves. And the idea that the better version can eventually act is one we need. Luke's faith in his father is, among other things, a statement about this. He doesn't argue that what Vader did was acceptable or small. He simply believes that the person underneath it is still there, that the person can still act. And he's right. In that very specific moment, in those very specific circumstances, the person acts. The story doesn't promise that this is always possible. It doesn't say that faith in someone's goodness is always rewarded, or that every Vader has a Luke willing to believe in them, or that every final act of redemption arrives before it's too late. It's telling you about this one case. And this one case, for whatever reason, seems to matter to people across generations and cultures in a way that probably exceeds what any franchise was designed to do. Vader matters because his story is about something, about the distance between who we are and who we might have been, and the even stranger distance between who we are and who we might yet become. And that's where I land with him, after all of this. Not with a conclusion exactly. Vader doesn't really invite conclusions. He invites sitting with things, the contradictions, the gaps between philosophy and outcome, the way someone can be both right about certain things and catastrophically wrong about what to do with that rightness. What I find most interesting about spending time with Vader philosophically, if I'm honest, is how much it illuminates things that have nothing to do with space wizards or the Force or fictional galactic empires. The Jedi Code and the Sith Code are a real argument between real philosophical traditions, compressed into opposing mantras and played out across 6 films. The question of what to do with fear, whether to let go or to grasp, or to find some third thing that neither Yoda nor Palpatine was offering, is not an abstract question. It's one people navigate all the time. The relationship between love and control, between caring deeply and holding lightly, between what we can change and what we simply have to live with. These are constant. Anakin Skywalker's tragedy is specific and enormous and set in a galaxy far away, but the mechanics of it are close and human and recognizable, and Luke's response to simply believe in someone, to stay present without demanding a particular outcome, is also close and human and recognizable. The saga manages to make both of these things true simultaneously, which is part of why it survived 50 years without becoming merely nostalgic. There's a future video, I think, in Obi-Wan specifically, a character who carries enormous guilt for what happened to Anakin and tries to make sense of his own responsibility in it, and probably something in the philosophy of the Force more broadly, separate from the codes and the factions. We'll see. For now, thank you for spending this time in this corner of the galaxy. If you're still awake, I hope you drift off soon. If you drifted off somewhere around Section 4, you made an excellent choice. Sleep well. I think what I appreciate most about the Vader story, sitting here at this hour turning it over, is that it takes its time. The saga gives him space to be complicated. He's not explained in one film. He's not redeemed in a montage. It takes 3 films to establish the villain, and then another 3 to show you who the villain was before he was a villain. And by the time you have all of it together, you're holding something that is genuinely heavy and genuinely earned. Stories do this. They give weight to things that might otherwise feel abstract. The philosophical questions we talked about tonight, what to do with fear, what love asks of us, whether power and wisdom are the same thing, whether institutions can fail the people they're supposed to serve, whether someone can change. These are real questions. They're worth thinking about, and thinking about them through Vader gives them texture and specificity and emotional traction that pure abstract discussion doesn't always have. If you're someone who has ever been afraid of losing something, you understand some of what Anakin felt. If you've ever been in a position where the help available wasn't quite the help you needed, you know something of what the Jedi failed to give him. If you've ever doubted whether there was good in someone, including yourself, and then been surprised, you know something of what Luke was betting on. The galaxy far